So Spirit Airlines shut down, which is so sad because I loved Spirit Airlines. I remember going on there for the first time and just being able to get a $50 flight down to Miami from New York. And it was so cheap. And I mean, they didn't give you anything. They just, not even like water. I think I got a sip of water, but there was no snacks. The seats didn't recline. It was pure get you from point A to point B safely and on time, cheaply. I think I booked the tickets the same day and that was it. And I think that that was beautiful. It took the inspiration of like what Ryanair is to Europe, where you can like fly to different countries within Europe really quickly, and applied it to America. Because obviously we don't have other states, but we do. I mean, we don't have other countries, but we do have other states. And so they saw a gap in the market, at least within the American market, and they decided to like enter the market based on that, which is an incredibly smart business idea. Like that's, find a gap, fill it, make money doing that. The problem is and what led to their demise is that they messed up on some of the core axioms of their business model. And this is why business models are so important. This was first popularized by the Harvard Business Review. And I remember reading this in college, and it was true. And it was an article that reiterated the truth of most enduring businesses. And they looked back and they like looked at history and they saw which businesses are still around. They looked at Sears versus Macy's versus Saks versus Bergdorf, like all of them. And what they found was that the businesses that survive for like, centuries or for a very long time or are still thriving follow the simple rule of better before cheaper, revenue before cost. And this is exactly where Spirit Airlines messed up because instead of making their flights better and more expensive, instead of making their flights, have more amenities like everyone else did, they decided to compete purely on cost. And when you compete purely on cost, you're just getting a race down to the bottom. You're getting a race down to zero. And you don't get to take into account your competition who might have more money than you, might have more resources than you, might have subsidizers. And so an example of this was being Shein, being a company that does fast fashion, obviously, and they sell fashion really quickly, but they sell it at a loss essentially because the Chinese government is now subsidizing that company so that they can dominate the market for fast fashion, and then eventually they can raise their prices a little bit or make it a profitable business. They just like to China always likes to dominate first, get the whole market share, get the whole market, and then they worry about the rest. And so the fact that, Spirit Airlines decided to compete purely on price means that when people got squeezed by rising costs of fuel, obviously with the Iran war, when people got squeezed by, just inflation in general and the cost of things going up and up and up while their wages remain stagnant, it means that, they're going to go to whoever's cheapest. And when Spirit Airlines cannot be the cheapest anymore, they fail. And so that's the main biggest issue that I found. I think another thing is they fail to adapt. And so when I was thinking about Netflix and what they started out as a mail order DVD business where you literally rented out, you like ordered through like a mail, like through the mail, and you got DVDs. And this was to take on Blockbuster, which was a company that you had physical stores. We had to go and return things. And if you had returned it late, you would get late fees, and that was like exorbitant. And so, this was a great disruptor, their mail order DVD business. They used something that was there, mail, and they got rid of late fees entirely. You don't have to go to the store physically. You don't have to pay rent for the stores in terms of cost. So it was a good business model. The problem was Redbox came and said, okay, well, we're going to have these little like kiosks everywhere in front of 7-Eleven and other common stores. And we're going to make it even, better. And so Netflix didn't just rest on its laurels and say, oh, this is our model. We do DVD business. They said, okay, we're going to go into streaming. And so obviously, long story short, they become the big powerhouse that they are today. And they still are, a huge major player within streaming. And then they added gaming and all these other things. And so I think that Spirit Airlines failed to adapt. That's really what happened. They didn't evolve their business model. The same way that Netflix said we can't just stay a mail order DVD business, we have to evolve with the times. Spirit Airlines could have done things to help it survive. It could have had a premium version of their service. They could have had, I think part of their business model was to use like flight plans or location pathways that weren't very popular and weren't very serviced that often. And so that just made it so that their logistics of how of flight time and having to be in the air and the cost of having that plane, um, they didn't have any margin. They had literally no margin. And so let's take a quick timeline. I mean, look at a timeline of their business. So, first they had the pandemic cash drain, right? So, we had global lockdowns, which completely froze travel. Like people were not traveling because the whole world was just shut down because everybody was, unfortunately passing away or getting infected. And so that already created a huge problem because their business is literally based on travel and there was no travel. So the whole market as a whole was already draining, and that lasted about 2 years. Then they had an engine crisis. So there was a defect within their manufacturing that made them have to do a recall. And this lasted another 2 years, and its Spirit was forced to ground up to 40 of its main planes. So this crippled their carrying capacity, which means that they still had to pay the cost of leasing these planes, but they were completely useless and they weren't able to go into the air. So that's a huge other cash drain. Next, they had a blocked merger and initial bankruptcy. Um, for this, basically, they wanted to get bought out. They were trying to sell their company, and so JetBlue actually planned to buy Spirit Airlines for $3.8 billion, but it was blocked. The U.S. government said no. You guys are going to create like too big of a company, and there's going to be less competition, and that's going to make prices go up. And so they had to instead file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Despite that Chapter 11 bankruptcy, they actually had to go into Chapter 22, which is just like a second round of bankruptcy. And that was already in 2025. We are obviously in 2026, right? So they did a brief restructuring, and just all the mounting issues that they're experiencing really causes them to just like go down for the count. And then the final blow was 2026 recently, where just the problems with Iran and them closing the or Hormuz Strait or whatever, Strait of Hormuz, where all the oil for the America, no, not for America, for the world comes out of, really just caused a sudden spike in fuel prices. And because they just had gone through all these different issues and they have low margins to begin with and they have no margin just based on their business model and everything else that was going on, they just had to say, okay, we have to call it quits and we have to shut down. And so to understand why Spirit Airlines could not survive this price war, you also have to look at like, JetBlue competed by also having super cheap flights. They have different classes. They have first class, they have business class, and then they have economy class. And so if you want the economy class experience, like you can do that, right? But then there are at least a way for them to cater to people who aren't going to be shut down because of price issues. And I think another one of the main takeaways is like when you attract customers who only compete on price, they have no loyalty. Like I choose to fly JetBlue because I like the experience. I know that they're going to have televisions, I know that it's going to have chargers, I think there's internet in the air now. And so I know that for an experience, especially if I'm going to be on somewhere stuck somewhere in the air for 6 hours straight, I need to be able to be entertained. And so I'm kind of like a JetBlue loyalist. But other people, if I was purely going on price and I find that there's another flight company that's offering the same flight or gets me to the same location for a cheaper price, then like I have no loyalty to you because I'm only loyal to whatever's cheapest. So, yeah, that's my quick analysis of what happened. I think that Spirit Airlines was a great company with actual potential to be great and to be a long lasting company, but they didn't make the right moves. They built their business model breaking a main business axiom, which is again better for cheaper, revenue before cost. Revenue before cost means doing what JetBlue did, where they diversified their offerings. So instead of just saying we're going to make everything cheaper, they said, okay, no, let's increase our revenue. Let's offer other options, find more ways to make money, provide more value that we can charge for. That way we can diversify and not be wiped out like Spirit was. So yeah, basically that's my analysis. If you want to read the article in full, obviously you can go to thelowreport.com and we have the full breakdown there. And it's a good read.